going to reintroduce myself. Hello, I'm Trista. I'm Pierce. I work at Niantic. I've been there about 7 months doing business development for enterprise customers. Been in the XR space for about 4 years. Before Niantic, I was at Booz Allen with some of the colleagues in here on the spatial computing rapid prototyping team. Been with this VRARA community for about 3 years now, knowing John and team, Nathan and team, and really grateful to be here and have a wonderful panel of co-panelists here. John needs no introduction, I don't think. Dan O'Brien, the general manager of HTC Americas, who you heard from earlier, and then Dan McConnell, who's the chief technologist at Booz Allen, my former colleague as well.
Okay.
We're going to jump in with some questions.
Fire away.
All right. How do you see XR and AI really solving the priorities and problems that the DoD and just the public sector are facing?
I have no idea. That's what we're trying to figure out. Is that a good answer?
Wonderful answer.
Okay, so the question is how do we see XR and AI helping solve the needs of defense? I think the defense industry was really one of the first to start evaluating and adopting XR technology, and it started off in pilot training. Right, if you go back to really where it started, it's like, hey, these full motion flight simulators cost $20 million each. We don't have enough of them to train our pilots. Is there a better way to train pilots? And of course, all the pilots are like, oh no, it took 40 years to even get simulators. It used to be you could only learn flying in the real thing. Then they started really accepting simulators. Now all of a sudden, it's like, oh no, we got to have these full motion flight simulators. And that's really where the first investments were going into, these massive big headsets. I think the one headset that Lockheed was selling was $50,000. Like Lockheed created a VR headset years ago. It was $50,000 per headset, and I think it worked at like 15 frames a second or something. Really ridiculous. Yeah, right? But, if you start looking at where the DoD has gone, they've really been the first ones to scale it and really use it. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff they're doing, we don't get the benefit in the industry of seeing because, some of it's sensitive. But everybody knows about the Microsoft IVAS program, right? The $21 billion contract that the Army gave to Microsoft to build, I'm going to use the word, the next generation fighting goggles, because that's really what they are. They're fighting goggles. They're going to be on the head of a soldier that goes out in the field and it gets information and it shares information with their teammates. That is a huge aspirational vision that nobody ever expected to happen, I think, for 10 to 20 years. But that drove the whole industry to realize that this technology is here now. And that commitment and that money that's gone into that program has really benefited a lot of us in other areas. But I think, to summarize, I think the DoD is actually seeing the benefits, the improvements. They've got all the data. Everyone always asks for, give me data, give me data. The DoD publishes a lot of their outcomes and on all these papers that you have to go find. But I think it's a sign to the rest of us. Now, AI as a whole nother level. And when you start integrating XR and AI together, it's like in the military, what do we call it, Hugh, a combat multiplier? Yep. Right? It's not 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 5. Because now all of a sudden you can, I'm going to give you an example. I can go into a situation and work on an aircraft, and I've never seen this aircraft, and the system can walk me through how to take off the panels, and it can see, oh, you're not doing that right, use a left-handed wrench. Get it? Left-handed, right-handed wrench? There's no such thing. Anyway, but they're taking 18-year-old kids out of high school and teaching them how to work on the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world in 3 to 4 months using these technologies. That's evidence. And so I think we're just at the beginning for defense, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And Dan O'Brien, can you give us an example of a use case that you've seen successful in the realms of XR and AI and how the ROI was really measured on that?
Yeah, I think we have 2 examples. One is in data analytics. There's a company called Flow Immersive. They do 3D data analytics where Jason Marsh's company. And what they've actually developed is the ability to actually talk to the data, right, and talk to the software. So while you're in the headset and you're looking at your data set that's been analyzed through your entire company, whether it's financial services, whether it's data analytics, field management for resources and people, supply chain, you can actually talk to the data in a way that just plain language, talk to it, and it creates Python code to actually then rescript it, give you another analytical view of that data in about 30 seconds to, if it's very complex, a couple of minutes. In the financial services space, like we looked at that and said, okay, if you're these trading analytics teams and these analyst teams, when you put a perspective together for a major investment, you might take 2 to 3 weeks with your analyst to actually put that perspective together, do all of the analytics. It comes to the senior, desk, and they say, well, what about this question, this question, this question? Go back, before we finalize that report. This is doing the report inside of 5 to 15 minutes, and removing, hundreds of man hours of efficiency and viewing and being able. And so the ROI is just speed to decision making, speed to, understanding the data in a much easier way. Like, for so many people that are experts, whether they're medical or wherever, they're not coding experts. And now they can actually just talk to the software, and it actually can write the code itself. The second area that I actually, I didn't mention to you earlier, but that's really an area that we're working actively with the DoD right now. There's another company up in Salt Lake City called Neurova Labs. And this is a neurological-based, human performance application. What we've been able to do with this application is, one, work the healthcare side, PTSD, and taking people that are in crisis, physical brain injury, psychological injury, and taking them to a normalized homeostasis state. So we have headsets today on the front line in Ukraine in forward hospitals, and we're working with PTSD patients right there. One of the most, impactful cases where we actually took a nonverbal patient from 3 months of nonverbal and had him verbal in about 45 seconds to a minute, and about 2 weeks later, back in the fight.
Wow.
And they also went 60 for 60 with other patients and took them, out of those critical care environments and put them back into a warfighting state. Now, on the lethality side of that, from the federal side of that, what we're able to do is take a baseline of where a soldier or a warfighter is today, and see what their cognitive load is, see what their impact is on their frontal lobe. Where we use our phones like a lot, right, during the day with social media and this and that, and we tend to beat on ourselves with our technology. And so this is actually taking people back to a normalized state. And what we actually do with this application now, taking people from a brain performance standpoint and putting them into an optimized state, when we worked with special operators and put them into a shooting scenario, or what they might call a kill box, they were able to get to decision making, average timing of taking a finger, putting the gun, safety switch off, muzzle up, and shooting a second faster than they would previously.
Wow.
And that's the difference between life and death in those scenarios.
Yeah.
So in terms of neurological, solutions with AI-based solutions like that, data analytics solutions, and the AI that's helping on that, just scratching the surface of the impact.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like we're all here because we really believe in this tech, and I love hearing stories about how it really impacts people's lives, and it's great.
I think before we go to the next thing, but I think something really important Dan was getting at is that it used to be, if I go back 5-6 years ago, we were focused on the silos. Oh, let's get XR to work on this type of person, right? Now we're talking about the intersection of all these technologies. So the neurologists, right, the folks that are really into the brain, they're like, oh, how can we use this technology to improve therapy? That's what's happening. It's all of this. It's sort of like these devices are now going to be just accepted. That's going to be included as part of your workflow. Mm-hmm. And that's going to unlock all the potential. Yeah, I think the goal for us with the DoD and several of the agencies right now is to actually, as a soldier comes in and is enlisted, they're not only deployed their pack, they're deployed a headset.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would. How many million service members are there?
We're helping people. You can be mission-based and profitable.
That kind of leads me perfectly into the next question around these ecosystems and the interoperability that we talked about earlier a little bit. Where are the gaps with public sector and the DoD, and how is this ecosystem coming together?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. John, teed it up perfectly, talking about the different silos. I think across the government, interoperability is a huge requirement. At least it should be a huge requirement. I tend to focus on DoD, so maybe starting there. John mentioned the IVAS program. So that's an Army program, but that has to not just interoperate with the soldier and the headset, but back to legacy systems and mission systems that data has to go so that other users can access that data. But now the way that we fight is increasingly joint across all domains, and so we have to be able to take that data and not just the Army Intel cell be able to use it, but the Navy SEALs, in the next sector over, would benefit from that real-time data. And so being able to integrate across the services, but then, you mentioned Ukraine, and so thinking about our partners and allies and being able to share that data in a smart and thoughtful way, and even the commercial sector, as we increasingly, the military doesn't just do fighting. You can think about humanitarian disaster response, even the COVID supply chain issue, and being able to integrate with the defense industrial base, critical infrastructure, and different partners. So I still see a number of gaps there. I think in terms of common data standards and networking protocols is like a huge one, just to start with. But then also just integrating with those systems and figuring out how to make those integrations much more seamless, right? And then finally, it was said at the beginning, cybersecurity. I think it's much more holistic security that we need to focus on, particularly when you have different security classification caveats where you're sharing with your partners or private or personal health information, in different use cases. So I think there's a lot of folks working on those gaps, but there's still some work to be done.
Yeah, and where is this emerging tech going to drive different requirements for the concept around JADC2 and all the interoperability around the forces? It's not easy.
Add on to that too. I think 2 years ago, most enterprise companies said, "Why are we using XR?" Last year, they asked us, "Well, how do we deploy it, or how do we do it?" This year, just starting off the year, multiple, CES and different customers, the most frustrating feedback from, the private sector customers is, stop asking me to, talk to 5 different companies to bring this solution in. Like, please now, just give me a vertical solution that has the device management, the different solution pieces. So in terms of those gaps, whether it's the federal government, whether it's private sector companies, they're now looking for, okay, great, I'm convinced of it, I understand, now I want to deploy it, and securely, safely, but please give me a vertical solution that has all these things combined together. So the opportunity for system integrators, the Booz Allen Hamiltons of the world to actually make sense of the mess and put it together for an endpoint customer, I think that's the big move you'll see this year too.
Yeah.
So on that, can I ask an open-ended question? Anybody can answer this. Are we starting to see budgets within large enterprises get unlocked to do this kind of stuff?
John's basically looking for business.
Corey, that's a given. I'm always looking for budget.
So,
No, but I think he's absolutely right. We're all looking for business, right? But I think the question is, up until now, we haven't really seen organizations saying, I'm putting X million dollars aside for a budget to do this. It's been scoop up funds where you can get them.
So, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier when you mentioned, there's no program office for DoD where I'm the PEO of XR headsets.
Right.
And so I think that short of that, there are a lot of prototyping and experimentation efforts that are ongoing across, at least in the DoD, as well as across the government. So I think from a commercialization and business perspective, there are some opportunities out there, and that those are also opportunities, as I see it, to influence policy and help speed up those programs of record that are related to this.
There's been the stand-up of the critical technology areas, and one of the focus areas is human-machine interfaces. There's the different commercial service offerings, solicitations going out there, so I feel like budgets are starting to get analyzed a little bit more.
Okay.
So, I mean, the program that we're doing right now in Ukraine Forward Hospitals with a couple of headsets is going to turn into several thousand headsets, by the end of this quarter. So, they see the impact. And then the U.S. Army and the U.S. delegates that are in the Ukraine, helping coordinate and work there, they're using all that data to then justify those budget spends here in the U.S.
Yeah. How do you see the public-private relationships and collaborations accelerating innovation? And what would be your recommendation and suggestions for private companies and commercial companies to work with the government?
Sure.
To any of you and all of you.
Is Christian still here by any chance? No, Christian was here. He was from the Defense Innovation Unit. That's exactly the kind of job that the DIU, they're here in the Bay Area to find companies that have these technologies and introduce them and get them into DoD. That's kind of what your group at Bright Labs is responsible for also, right? But I think the answer is there's this challenge that small startup companies or small companies that don't have a lot of resources go try to work with the DoD and they just get stuck in this massive system, right? And that's hard to do. So we got to find ways to accelerate that whole process. Partnering is the key to do that, right? Partnering with the government agencies that do that, partnering with large organizations that have the resources to do that. But yeah, I mean, every day it's like I get people calling me. I'm like, oh, John, I want to go to work in the DoD. Let's go after a SBIR. How many of you have gone after SBIRs before? Who's won SBR? Who's won a SBIR in this room? Who's scaled a SBIR? Okay. You scaled one? No?
No, we just say. No.
But if you went to a conference and 1,000 people were in a DoD conference, people would raise their hand and then they'd drop them and there'd be 2 people that actually scaled, right? So what does that say? That's tough. Small companies that go put time and effort. The SBIRs never pay for your business. They give you some money. SBIRs are small business incentive. They're small grants, whatever. But the promise is if you do well here, we're going to take you and you're going to grow. Very few companies do that because it's just hard.
Yeah, I mean, to build on that side, I think a lot of companies hear that promise, but I think the public-private partnership really, the value add on the government side, like the DIUs who are doing great work connecting these small businesses to these opportunities, that's doing a lot. That's like providing the innovation engine for the government, for these public agencies that are working on that. And there is a lot of work, unfortunately, to overcome a lot of the challenges associated with that. You mentioned a number of great ways to overcome that. But I think as that improves, understanding the upside of commercializing that and bringing it to a program of record, that's where it really tips over to the company. So hopefully we can kind of tip the scales and hit a tipping point there where it's a lot easier to start with a commercialization and a cybersecurity plan and a small prototype and figure out a way and have a target in mind of where you want to bring that to a full-scale production.
OTAs.
OTAs is another good example of it.
I think too, one of the other examples, where we found a lot of challenges was with our private 5G solution, right? We really wanted to show a lot of people how content was going to get delivered, in the future, right, to a wearable, and that it was going to come from a cloud environment. You weren't going to have all this content and everything, resident on the headsets, and how do you do all that stuff? Well, it's been a slow slog for 3 years for us on the P5G, but we've been successful with Mexico City Police. I think we're also in the Netherlands, a couple of other places where we have 5G solutions, and then just showing people over time, okay, now, you got to stick with it, right? Because, now we're at a point where we were originally at, multiplayer with people in multiple rooms trying to meet in a virtual environment and then do, some sort of collaboration and teams training there. Now we're at a point where, we can do 10,000 square meters, a very large, an airline, environment, and you can have 30 headsets, running across, one, private 5G box, and it's just slowly, showing the scale of delivering content, securely, to that many users, like people didn't realize, they didn't even know that you could actually do that yet. So 5 years ago we were stuck with these cables, right, that only went about 5 meters, and now you're talking about 30 people running around an airplane hangar, and operating as teams in a virtual environment. So I think just in general, like what we're able to do, right now, and getting that knowledge out there, it's pretty impressive. I think you can do a lot of really amazing outcome solutions and go into a lot of the different environments. It's pretty
So
important.
let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why is it that people, let me ask the question this way. How come why is it that more organizations aren't asking for that kind of connectivity? And the answer is because they haven't scaled it yet. They haven't gotten, to get 10 users in a room scaling 100 million poly models, do you know what that takes? You're going to crush your IT network, right? You need to be able to offload that content off of your core infrastructure onto something else. What HTC's done with their 5G in a box, it's going to solve a lot of companies' problems. You can go into manufacturing line, throw up a 5G private cloud. Now you can put all your VR, AR, MR headsets on that network and not even put any load on the corporate IT infrastructure. Now getting through the wireless stuff and policies, that needs to be addressed too. But just the fact that they don't have to go in and upgrade all their access points themselves, that's just taking another barrier out. But the reason is that people haven't scaled it yet, so they haven't gotten to that point where that's a problem, but they will, right? So.
Yeah. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but
Questions from any of these folks?
yeah, questions from anyone in the room?
I had a comment, Dan, you mentioned flow immersive. I saw there on Jason Marsh did the demo of you say something and then it writes the Python code and works with the data in really deep ways.
Yeah.
And my son right now is studying at university to be a quant and to study math and computer science. I called him and I said, what you're studying, stop studying that.
Yeah, right?
You are not going to need to know how to write Python. You are only going to need to know how to talk to AI. And Jason was actually really nice. My son got me to talk to Jason so we could find out what he does need to learn. But we're going to see all of this is going to really change the skills that people need.
Yeah. I think the people that, it's interesting. I look back at 2017, 2018, with the first Vive Pro. Right, and we had at CES, I think we had probably 15 or 16 enterprise companies, and we were finding these unicorns of a pediatrician, physician, OSO VR, right? It was one of the first companies that we worked with, and that we found a pediatric physician and somebody that was new game engines and writing code, and we were like, wow, look at this unicorn, right? And I think now looking at what AI is going to enable now, these whether it's a physician, whether it's a math scientist that's working in a financial services firm, really knowing though what questions to ask is still critically important. I think being having the burden of writing the code, removing that and the speed of it. But I think there is going to be those data scientists and those applications that they have to make sure those applications are not off, right? And they're presenting correct information. There's going to be a human intervention side of that needs to stay on top of that. So your son's probably still going down a really good path.
But if you take away the really, really deep expertise, what this does is it democratizes access to this level of understanding.
Yep.
And the interface becomes even more important, and an intuitive interface like the ones that.
I think that's a great point. I mean, we were the first company to make a 4G LTE phone. We had no idea that Uber would come from it, right? That's one of the the companies that came out of 4G LTE. We have I think the great part is I've been in this industry long enough in wireless and connectivity and wearables and handhelds that We still don't know, right? Like these great big jumps in innovation, and without saying, sounding too, pie in the sky, but I think, it does democratize it, and there's going to be a lot of creativity that actually comes from all of this. Yeah.
You brought up the use of, and you taught the use of XR and spatial data, right? But the ability to see data spatially and understand data, that's a whole, it's a horizontal solution, but it can be applied to any vertical, right? And I've already seen some companies that are data analytics platforms that are in the back. They're working on their VR, XR, and they're going to open up the gate, and all of a sudden, order your headset from them and do all your analytics and your stock trading and everything in spatial. That's coming. It's happening. Yeah, and you're right. Some of the generative AI and code development is going to happen, but a couple of years ago, somebody asked me, I was at a university, what recommendations would you have for students? I said, tell them they need to learn Unity, because I worked for Unity at the time. But what I was really saying is, coding is important, but we're now at this democratization point of tools. Tools are just going to get better and better. It's kind of like PowerPoint, right? I can go create my own presentation. I don't need a team of people to build a presentation. Well, yeah, I do, if you've seen my PowerPoints. But that whole point of critical thinking and understanding how to use data and apply it to solve problems, that's not going to go away. Machines aren't going to do that for us.
I started in COBOL.
COBOL? Did you have to fill out the little forms
and
with
then
pencil?
Python, then Java, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Is this all helpful, guys? Yeah? It'll be, I know you all have all these questions, and when the wine and beers open up, they'll all flow out. That's what happens.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you guys think as far as content? Because I feel that is always the thing that lags. Obviously, the IT, security, all those things have to happen as well. But I've seen very few examples where the content is so good and so ready to go and so scalable.
Is that organizations want content unique for themselves. They want it to be, if I'm building a thing, I want the content to be for my thing. I want it to be unique. You saw the GE Vernova example, right? But companies don't want to pay for the custom content development. They want you to come in and give me a subscription. I'm going to pay you $30 a month for my user to be trained on how to use that fire extinguisher. But when you get into more advanced, complex things or assembly lines, that is all unique content. And I've had this debate internally with my own company where our sales teams come back and say, oh my gosh, we got to build this content for this, and every HR organization around the world is going to use it. And I call bullshit on that, because I said, if you go to JP Morgan Chase, they're going to want their new staff to be trained very specifically into there. So you need enterprise platforms, kind of like what Corey's platform is, where you can create that workflow that's customized to that organization. That's what they want. So we're not there yet. We're not there yet. I mean, I think that's the answer.
I think content is the last mile problem. It always has been. Content is king, but 3D is fine.
Content is queen.
Or is content...
Content's really important. Doesn't identify. Just say, I think that comes down to what's the problem that company's really trying to solve for, right? Right. And I think too, one of the important things that I think we're trying to really transition our conversations with a lot of our end customers and partners is, talk a little bit less about the technology and 5G and polygons and 10-second, millisecond, round trip. It's really fun for the nerds, but it's really not fun for the people that are trying to solve a problem in their organization, or if they're military leadership. They're like, hey, this is the problem. Can you solve that problem? So I think too, when we look at we've shifted the talking points from here's the technology, here's the headset, here's how much it weighs, to here is the performance improvement that we can make with PTSD patients and getting them back to battle readiness state. Here is decision-making performance that we can do based on you're making their brain health, more effective, and creating a solution that actually can go inside of any content, right? And so, it's looking at, can you train an officer to pick up a taser instead of a lethal weapon? So it's those kinds of, over and over and over again types of repetitive, scenarios. There's a lot of different ways to train all of those, examples. But I think, content is critical, but I think the most important thing for the content creators is, instead of just creating, anybody, the game side of this, right, of the consumer game side of it was, Chet Falzick, used to tell me, anybody can make a 3-minute slice that looks amazing, right? But creating that 4 to 8 hour game, that is amazing. That's hard, right? And the same goes for the enterprise side. But I think as long as the developers and the content creators are much more focused on the performance outcome that they want to, it doesn't always have to come from the most perfect 3D shaded magical, experience.
Business people are trying to sell to businesses, and they can articulate it in the language. If you come to me and I'm the CFO of an organization and you say, I can save 15% of your operational costs annually, I'm all ears. I don't care about what technology it is. Let's talk. Yeah? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would add or flip the question and say, like, is the content good depends on the requirements by the user. As an example, in a military example, like the content might not necessarily work if it is too good. It might break my network. I might not have the bandwidth to receive what I need. And as an example, about a year and a half ago, Trista at the time, we were with a lot of soldiers in Texas running an experiment with about 4 different types of headsets, 5 different AR, VR applications, and like the requirements to know, I don't want a little figure of a soldier running, like I need a dot, because we don't have the bandwidth to do that, and that's what I need. And that's what wowed the decision makers, the business leaders, to be able to have that new capability.
And then the operators not being overloaded. Like, not everyone needs to see every detail of the terrain. Sometimes they need a compass. So it kind of depends on the use case and the content required.
Thank you.
All right.
Awesome. I think handing it back over to you.
Next.
You, Hugh?
Hugh.
That's it. That brings us to the end of our program. So again, thank you for. So thanks again to Dan, all the Dans, and HTC for hosting. Thanks for everybody for coming in. Again, thanks to our speakers for the awesome presentations, the engagement, providing these insights and perspective. The goal is.
Well, I want to say thanks to Hugh for standing up and being a chapter president, and the gal for being advisor. And those of you that are in the area that would like to be advisors and help Hugh out, please talk to him.
Give me a shout. As mentioned at the beginning, the goal is to get people together, kicking ideas around, collaborating, thinking about how we can partner and work together to add value to the end user. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. That's what tonight's been about.